Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Okay, so today's a pretty dang exciting day. Well, first off, I got some new Slingshot Targets at Walmart last night, and so I got to make a little stand for these to put them in my outside catch barrel, and then going to go on a little slingshot safari. We got a little bit of chicken, a little pig, and a turkey, and a ram. For size reference, there's a penny, so you can see how big that chicken is. So it ought to be a fun little break for later this afternoon. Second thing is I've got a whole batch of knives over here. I'll bring you along. Whole batch of knives over here today. These are all going to get, they're all rough sanded, and the handles are fit up. These are pretty much ready to go. The handles are. These right here still need the bolster and the little spacer and the everything finished, fit up, made to look really nice, and then drill the holes for the pins that go through the tangs. And then all these blades get their finishes cleaned up, etch the marks, and with a little bit of luck, go ahead and get all these glued up today. And that way I can go ahead and start grinding handles tomorrow. And we did things a little bit backwards with the dogs this morning. Typically I run them in the evening, with the ball with a long throw stick, get them get their exercise. But lately it's been, well, hot for around here, high 80s and low 90s. So this morning I went ahead and ran them, and Wyatt there, he's looking pretty tired, like he's going to take a nap here in a little bit. And of course Doc, Doc has got his, thing with the tennis balls, so he'll probably, but look how long that tongue is. So he'll probably take a nap here in a little bit too and let me get some good work done. So the video I released this last week was on kitchen knife tang styles, okay? And kind of an overview about the two different styles of handle construction that I like to use on my kitchen knives. I went through the full tang, well, 2.5, I guess. Went through a full tang construction, both pinned with peened pins and the Corby bolts. And then went over the hidden tang construction, with the fitted, I still don't know what you call that. I mean, if it had a protrusion out front, it would be a guard. Like, here's a really old one. So if it had a protrusion, it'd be a guard, but it doesn't have a protrusion. So do you still call it a guard? Bolsters are generally kind of long and are soldered to the sides. They're not pierced like that. So whatever the heck you call it, that's the way I like to make my preferred method of handle attachment for a long-term kitchen knife. That's when money's not an issue, and especially on forged blades. On production type work, it's much faster and simpler to do a full tang construction, which is why the majority of kitchen knives out there have got a full tang construction. If they're not like like a knife like this, where like an injection molded or some sort of a plastic type handle. But this right here is still basically a hidden tang construction, because the tang is completely surrounded by the handle material. This is just a Victorinox 8-inch class chef. Actually a pretty good kitchen knife. I use this one for cutting sandpaper here in the shop. So anyway, I think in that last video, maybe I was a little bit rough on the full tang knives, and kind of seems like I came across with the impression that I don't particularly care for full tang knives. And that's not true. Kind of tough to find a correlation right off the top of my head. I should have thought about one to begin, or beforehand. But it's just a different construction method. You know, there's certainly nothing wrong with a full tang handle construction. You know, just like there's nothing wrong with a hidden tang construction. Some knives, pretty much you're stuck with a full tang construction. Other knives, you're pretty well stuck with a hidden tang construction. You know, like this. You know, I mean, like a hunting knife. Now, granted, this was a really old. I mean, this was probably 10 years ago, or maybe even 15 or so. That was back when I was still doing 2 pins in the, you know, in a hidden tang. To get a guard, pretty much that means you're going to need a hidden tang type construction. Okay, at least the way I do it. You're going to need to have a pierced, you know, a pierced guard to be able to make a nice even guard. I suppose you can do a full tang with a guard, but you know, there you're looking at you know, slotting the guard material and then, you know, putting it onto the tang. And if it's a full tang, then you're going to have to drill a couple little bitty pinholes through the guard material and the blade, you know, before heat treat, and pin that in, or solder it in, or a combination of both. And that's, you know, honestly, it seems like an awful lot of extra work when a pierced guard is just so much easier. On the other hand, you know, these Carter pattern neckers and the EDC that I make, you know, this style of this, you know, profile and everything, that would be very tough to make as a hidden tang design. You know, with this, you know, this integral, it kind of, I mean, it's a finger groove, but it kind of acts the same way as a guard does, only, you know, a guard, everything is on your index finger, whereas on this particular design, that force is split between these 2 fingers. Okay, so it's a very, very secure design in the hand. It's just so it's very like a guard, but it's just split between 2 fingers instead of 1, which is why I like it so much. So anyway, so certain styles of knives, you know, lend themselves better to one construction method over the other. Now, that last, well, we'll leave that there because we'll probably need it again. That one of the last knives that I flashed in that last video was this knife right here. This is an old hickory, 7 or an 8 inch. I don't know. They probably call this a butcher knife, I guess. And their handles, honestly, you know, I mean, this just happened. Okay. Now, don't get me wrong. If I was not a knife maker, I would have a whole bunch of these in my kitchen knife block. I mean, for what they are, for the cost, for the type of steel that they used, for the overall construction, durability, how long these things have been out there, these are some classic, truly amazing knives, right? But the handles honestly kind of suck. They're hickory handles, which, you know, I love hickory also. But their construction method, for the amount of money that they're getting out of these knives and the incredible value that these knives represent, their handle construction is why you get this, honestly, this nastiness right here, right? So I'm going to go through and tell you a couple of things about how to, first off, construct a handle that has a far less likelihood of having this happen to near this degree. And second of all, you know, give you some pointers if you have a knife like this, you know, an old hickory type, to keep this from happening so fast. Now, this particular knife right here, I did not buy new. I probably got this at a yard sale or a flea market or something like that. So I have no idea the history or how it was made. And we're not going to tear this one apart. I'll just kind of describe what they look like underneath, and that'll kind of give you, that'll lead into the construction methods. Okay, so first of all, we're going to pick this handle apart. The newer ones of these that I've seen, or the ones that I've stripped the handles off because, you know, they were busted off or they seriously warped, you know, and were tearing themselves off, and I did rehandles for somebody or whatever. These, the tang typically only has the holes that the rivets go through. Okay, so instead of like this handle, this was a test for something or other, I can't remember what it was, but it was a while back. So this one would have been a, well actually here, let's grab another one. Oh. Clear was underneath my foot and tripped me. Okay, so this is a, one that I'm about to put together right now. We've got our pinhole, a pinhole, and a pinhole. Okay, these are the 1/8 inch holes, and then the rest of these holes are what I call epoxy rivet holes. These holes are there so that the epoxy can grip this scale, go clear through the hand or through the tang, and then grip the inside face of the other scale. Okay, so these they just provide a path for that epoxy to hold everything together. Okay, and then of course the pins are a mechanical lock. This type of handle, if you were to rip the handle off, you wouldn't have the epoxy rivet holes. Okay, you would just have the hole for each rivet. And so that doesn't leave any way for that epoxy to kind of join everything together. Okay. Also, the majority of these that I've ripped the handles off of, honestly, I'm not too sure that there ever was any epoxy in here. Okay. These rivets right here, they are they're a press fit type of rivet. So you have a oh, I get a whiteboard. So this type of rivet here is there's a male and a female part. Okay, so that would be the female part, and then the male part looks like that. Okay, so I guess we can go like this maybe. Okay, so as those two, and then this is a press fit into here. Okay, so that when you hammer these two together, they lock in place. All right, they're not a screw in, they're not really adjustable, they're kind of a one-shot deal, because once you press this into this side expands a little bit to grip that, and then it's locked in, right? So with that type of a fastener, they are very, very quick, to put these handles together. Now granted, these knives, I think last I saw, they're selling for, like $15 or something. So for the company to make any kind of profit at all, at the $15 mark, especially once they factor in steel and wood and labor and and that's retail, not wholesale. So they're really trying to save every second and every penny that they can on construction. So what they do is they take this handle material, or this scale, and and they put the rivets in there, and then they hit it with a press, and then that rivet is stuck. Now this handle is, it's not really going anywhere. I mean, you're going to have to really kind of work at it to remove that handle. You're going to have to grind it off, or about the easiest way is you take an old junk knife and you slip it. See how deep that's going into that scale already? You slip it down in there, and then you beat the back of this knife with a hammer, okay? And then it will cut that rivet off, okay? Then you pull that one off, and then you come back here, and then you beat that one in, and it'll cut that rivet in half. And then, the handle falls apart. So it's a very, very secure method of attaching, the handle scales. But there's not really any provision for stopping moisture and gunk from getting in between the handle scales and the tang. This being high carbon steel, that is what causes this nastiness, where the handle scales kind of warp and they're kind of pushed away. You can tell right here that this wood is higher than the face of the rivets. Okay, and then on the tang, you can tell that the wood is higher than the tang. This part right here, it got split off. You know, I mean, it is what it is. For home use, you know, as long as you keep your handle, you know, mostly dry and everything, I don't think this would be a problem. I hear in commercial kitchens that the FDA or the kitchen inspectors, you know, the city, you know, revenue collectors, they come in and they see this and they say, hey, that's, you know, that's not what they want to see, because you can have bacteria that's hiding in here. With those guys, pretty much what they want to see is a stainless knife with a synthetic type handle, you know, that has got a nice seam there where, you know, you can't have bacteria in. Okay, so if you are, if you just purchased one of these knives, okay, and you want to keep the handle, you know, from acting like this for as long as possible, realize that this is going to be the eventual state of this handle pretty much no matter what you do, you know, 20, 30 years from now. But for the next 5 or 10 years, you can go ahead and keep the handle oiled. Okay, so take yourself some, I like mineral oil, also sold as bamboo oil or cutting board oil. It's a food grade, I believe mineral oil is a petroleum-based oil. You can get it, uses for mineral oil are cutting board oil, baby oil. They sell it in the pharmacy section. Can't remember what the bottle is called. It might just be mineral oil, but for use as a laxative. I buy my stuff, you know, this stuff by the gallon from Farm and Ranch Supply House. And that's, I think, what they use for that. I mean, I don't raise cattle or anything, but I think they use it for laxatives for cattle. So, but it is, you know, it's not going to hurt you if you, you know, end up ingesting some of it. So anyway, so you keep that oiled up. Now that'll keep that wood kind of not swollen up, but it'll keep it in a normal state, okay? The second that wood starts drying out, it's going to start shrinking, okay? When it starts shrinking, it's going to shrink away from the handle material. Once it shrinks away, now you start getting more gaps and you start getting trash in there, and then, you know, that trash will start opening up, you know, your fit between your scale and your blade, and then that allows corrosion to start happening, and then it just keeps getting worse and worse from there on. So keep your handle oiled up. When it looks like it's kind of dry, give it a couple of drops of mineral oil and keep that handle in good shape, and then you're much less likely to have this happen so quick. The same thing happens with stainless knives. This is one of the Chicago cutlery paring knives that I bought for my wife and I when my wife moved in with me 22 years ago, something like that. Now it's a stainless blade, so there's not near as much corrosion going on, but you can definitely tell that that handle is kind of swole up a little bit. There are some gaps, although not near as bad. These knives right here, I got onto her pretty quick right after she moved in with me about not soaking knives in the sink or, you know, in pans or anything like that. So pretty much these knives right here, they get used, or they pulled out of the block, they get used, they get set on the side of the sink, okay? When it's time to wash them, you pick them up, you grab the sponge, you wash the thing, you dry it off, you set it in the rack or back in the, you know, the knife block. So these handles don't get soaked, they get treated pretty good, and you can tell, I mean, that's about a, you know, a 20-some-year-old, you know, full tang handle. Now these knives also, I don't believe that there's any epoxy or any glue inside there either. And it's got the same type of hammer rivet construction. All right? There's one other way that you can make, or there's another way that you can make these handles appear nicer for longer. This right here is a case boning knife. I really like Case's stuff. And I really can't tell if this one I really can't tell if this one's high carbon steel or some sort of a stainless. I bought this one at a garage sale also for like $1.50, something like that. But what they did was, and it's a synthetic handle material, and it looks like hammered rivets, but they left the tang proud all the way around on purpose, okay? So it's stuck up, or, you know, I mean, it's raised. You can definitely tell right in here that it's raised probably a 1/16 of an inch, okay? And then they just sloped everything to meet it. And so it actually doesn't feel bad in the hand at all. And somebody took fairly good care of it. Now this is a synthetic material, so it's much less likely to warp. But you can tell this knife was taken pretty good care of. I mean, as in, it wasn't soaked, it wasn't run through the dishwasher, you know, that sort of deal. And then this one right here is probably the longest running full tang knife that I have in my kitchen. This is what I call a large paring knife, and it has got 2 large Corby bolts as the handle fasteners. I only did that for maybe a couple of months when I first started making paring knives. Use the large Corby bolts on them because they're just too big for the handle size, right? But this knife also is a full tang construction. It does have epoxy, that is Bolivian rosewood, and it's got good solid handle fasteners, and it is treated well. Now there's no place on this knife that you can get a fingernail in between the tang and the handle material, and it's nice and solid. And this knife, I bet you, is probably 8 or 9 years old, something like that. Again, it gets taken care of really well. It's never been run through the dishwasher. It's always hand washed, dried, and put away. And you can even see some of the epoxy is still right there in the joint. Okay, so what this tells us, first off, use a good epoxy. Okay, I use actually, hang on a second. I use either this 5-minute Loctite epoxy for, you know, pinned pin type handles. For hidden tang type handles, I typically use this G-Flex stuff. This G-Flex is it's like a 1 hour type epoxy, whereas this is like a 5-minute epoxy. I mean, one's not better than the other one. It's just different handle construction methods. But use a good epoxy. The Loctite 5-minute is good. I've got some stuff from Pops before. I can't remember the name of the other epoxy that I was using. DevCon maybe. But anyway, use a good epoxy, and keep your witness cup. Okay, so you'll mix your epoxy together, right, in a cup or on a piece of paper or something like that. Mix up your epoxy. Assemble your knife, set it off, let it cure, right? When the amount of time has gone by that epoxy should have cured, take that scrap or whatever your leftover epoxy is and take a look at it. Stick your fingernail in it, make sure that epoxy cured properly, okay? If your sample didn't, or if your, we call it a witness, if your witness epoxy didn't cure right, then probably the epoxy that's inside your handle didn't cure right, and you might want to rip that handle back off and make a new one. Okay? So use a good epoxy and make sure that it's set up. When you set up your handle for the epoxy, if you're doing the full tang construction, one common mistake is to finish things off too smooth or at too high of a grit, okay? I typically flatten these handle scales on 80 grit sandpaper, all right? See, 80 grit sandpaper. What that does is it leaves nice 80 grit scratches in the glued surface on the inside of these, scales. And that leaves a whole bunch of stuff for that epoxy to grab a hold of, okay? If you were to finish these at, say, a 600 grit and then try to put that epoxy together, that epoxy's got nothing to grab a hold of, okay? Imagine a rock climber trying to climb a glass wall. He'd need suction cups or something to be able to grab it. There's nothing for his fingers to grab a hold of. Same thing with the epoxy. That epoxy needs something, a rough surface, to be able to grip, to be able to provide a holding strength. Your tang is going to be the same way, okay? Now typically these tangs on a full tang type knife, I finish them off with a maroon Scotch-Brite belt, which I want to say is about a 200 grit finish, something like that. And that seems to work pretty good. It's quick to, rip the scale, the heat treat scale and everything off. And it leaves a surface that's, got enough roughness that the epoxy can grab. So, I mean, in a perfect world, you would put 80, that 80 grit finish on your tang also. But the problem with there is you try to put an 80 grit finish on this and stop it right here so that your 80 grit finish doesn't get shown, and to where it's just right here and you don't remove, any material here so that you create a step. That's kind of a tough thing to do. So, typically I'll take, my blade finish, 600 grit or so, and then take it down to where it's almost touching that front pinhole, and then where that pinhole goes back, from there it's that Scotch-Brite belt finish, and from here up it's that 600-ish grit finish, which means that you'll have some part of it right up in here that'll be a 600 grit finish, and it won't grab quite as well, but as long as the rest of your construction is good, you can get by with that. And it leaves, a good looking, joint. There's never any steps or any, kind of nastiness in there. So your surface prep on your tang material, or your handle scales and your tang, is very important. I don't really get kind of like all Twitter pated over, cleaning this up with epoxy or with acetone, to get the grease off your fingertips and all that kind of stuff off. Typically when I'm, getting ready to do my glue up, my fingers have got sanding grit and all that kind of stuff on them, and so that my fingertips are generally fairly dry when that happens. I mean, if I was to take a piece of glass and put my finger on there, you wouldn't really get the grease from your fingertip on the glass, if that makes any sense. I mean, you don't want to, like, handle it too much. If you're worried about it, then right before you go to install it, take that tang right back over the Scotch-Brite belt, clean it on one side, clean it on the other side, and then just handle it by the blade the rest of the time. So your finishes on your scales and your tang, your epoxy holes, and use a good epoxy, and don't overheat the blade when you are don't overheat the handle when you're grinding everything flush and shaping the tang or the handle and everything. If you do heat the tang up too much, you can cause the epoxy to fail. This epoxy, as great as it is, it doesn't really handle heat all that well. So your application on here says that you should apply it between 39 degrees Fahrenheit and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. It withstands negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit and 120 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? Which means that if you keep that knife, whatever is comfortable to you, typically that epoxy will, handle it okay. In the case of my everyday carry knife, I think I mentioned this on that last video, that I can tell that those handles are, that epoxy's kind of losing its grip in there, okay? The reason is that knife is with me all the time, okay? So if I'm out working and it's 100 degrees that day and I'm working in the flat out sun, you know, that knife could reach 120 degrees, you know, and then, you know, especially being right up next to my body, and then all that, you know, the sweat that rolls down onto it while it's really hot. You know, it is what it is. I mean, these knives, they're tools, you use them. So, you know, stuff happens. But seeing as how that it's got the epoxy rivets going through it, it's got peened pins, that handle, you know, pretty much for that handle to catastrophically fail, all right, which is what we're concerned with. I mean, you might have you know, a little bit of shrinkage here or some swelling going on, whatever. But for that handle to come off of there, pretty much you're going to have to beat it off or grind it off, you know, otherwise that handle's not coming off. So the full tang construction is a good means of construction. There's just some things to kind of look out for when you're making them or when you're using them. And I hope I didn't scare anybody off of full tang constructions on that last video. In my mind, a partial tang or a hidden tang construction is superior to a full tang construction, especially in a kitchen knife where, you know, it's being exposed to changes in temperature and changes in humidity over and over and over again for a period of decades. But that does not mean that a well put together full tang construction isn't a viable option and a very good option, honestly. I mean, this one right here has been with me for, you know, 8, 9, 10 years or so, and it's still in good shape. And, you know, I mean, it's not slowing down any. You know, I mean, I'll probably keep this knife in my kitchen block for another 10 years or so. And it'll keep doing just fine and keep, you know, working, making my life easier in the kitchen. So, again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time.